This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
As the world marks Poverty Eradication Day, we look at efforts by African countries to step out of poverty. UK and EU leaders reach a deal on Brexit. And how returning migrants are rebuilding their lives in Senegal. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. I'm Hannah Vivier. And for the latest in your business news, here is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business. Nigeria's central bank has refunded lenders it fined the cash they were fined after they agreed to lend it into the economy. And if you're hard of hearing, you can now enjoy your music. We'll explore how when you come back. Details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much, Rama. Well, we begin in Ethiopia, where about 400 local migrants serving prison sentences in Saudi Arabia returned home on Wednesday. According to the Foreign Affairs Ministry, 32,890 Ethiopian migrants jailed in different countries have been returned in the past 3 months alone. For more on this, we're now joined by CGTN's Koleta Wanjohi. Koleta, just give us an update on the migrants' return.
Well, like many other Ethiopians who are deported from Saudi Arabia, especially, the issue is usually illegal migration. Most of them find themselves in Saudi Arabia and different parts of the country, Riyadh, within the capital city and beyond, without legal documentation. And this is because there is a racket of human traffickers within the country in Ethiopia that are, the racket assists Ethiopians to go to these countries, with the hope that they will get better money. And that is because they have seen other people in their villages having done better by going to Saudi Arabia. And so they are easily convinced that if they pay some money to the human traffickers, they can be able to get themselves to the other side. But what usually happens is they do not understand. Most of them are ignorant. They do not understand that when they get to Saudi Arabia, there's legal documentation that is needed, and there's also authorities that are supposed to ask them this. So most of the people who have come back over the years since 2017 and even before are people who have been imprisoned because they were arrested without legal documentation. And also we should also remember that some of these releases that we are seeing is a measure of goodwill for the Saudi Arabian government to Ethiopia. Now Saudi Arabia, the UAE are very close to Ethiopia, and Saudi Arabia has been instrumental to Ethiopia-Eritrea peace deal. So now it is, Saudi Arabia showing that they can work together with Ethiopia in many other things apart from economy. We've got military cooperation and so much more. So most of the migrants who are coming home because they were arrested for being illegal in Saudi Arabia. And of course, there are others who have been involved in some crimes like brewing illegal alcohol and also other petty crimes.
Koleta, well then give us a little bit more on whether the migrants will continue to serve their jail terms in local prisons, or will they be set free?
It is highly likely that they will be set free, depending on if it was a matter of illegal documentation. It's highly likely they'll be set free and released to go back to the community. And now we know the government has a program that it has set up to allow some of these returnee migrants to get enrolled in formal education and also formal skills. To get more skills in different issues so they can be able to go back, but this time in a legal way. So it's highly likely that most of them will be set free, and others who had criminal activities, then the government will take it from there and decide how to punish them from here. But moving forward, we are likely to see the government putting really strict measures in terms of trying to crack down on the human traffickers this side and trying to encourage those who've come back not to go back, because that's a really big issue. Some of them come, they are released into the society, but again they go back through the same system through human traffickers with a belief that first time was bad luck and the next time will be better. So this is what we're expecting. Most of them will be released to go back home, and others probably punished by the government in one way or the other. But Ministry of Foreign Affairs is expected to highlight more on what will be done to those who are seen to be really have serious criminal records.
Thank you so much, Coletta. That was what Coletta Wanjohi is speaking to us from Addis Ababa. Well, today is International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. A recent report released by Oxfam shows that inequality in Africa is on the rise and goes on to say that the increase in inequality is undermining efforts to fight poverty. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
Titled A Tale of Two Continents, the report says 7 out of 20 of the world's most unequal countries are in Africa. Swaziland, Nigeria, South Africa and Namibia are named as the most unequal countries in the world. Inequality on the African continent traces its roots to colonialism, where political and economic power was concentrated into the hands of a few, a practice that's carried on to present-day Africa. The situation was further compounded by the debt crisis of the 80s and 90s, when much of the continent was subjected to structural adjustment programs, which entrenched inequality further. And the situation is not getting any better. Oxfam says the number of people in Africa living on less than $2 a day is increasing. And according to the World Bank, if current trends continue, 87% of the world's extreme poor will be in Africa by 2030. But it's not all doom and gloom. A European Commission study of sub-Saharan Africa found that education can be used as a tool to reduce income inequality. The study found schooling raised the income share of the bottom 80%, mainly at the expense of the top 10%. It also highlights progressive tax systems which tax the wealthy more, raising revenue that can be invested in social spending. South Africa topped the list of African countries' commitment to tackling inequality. Egypt came in 16th place, while Nigeria came in last at 45th. Its president, Muhammadu Buhari, has promised to lift 100 million people from poverty in a decade. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, despite the bleak statistics, several African countries are putting measures in place to combat poverty. Yasser Hakim looks at how Egypt is doing it.
Two political uprisings, followed by austerity measures, have had its toll on Egyptians since 2011. To help sustain the burdens of economic reforms, a host of social security measures have been put in place.
The government has spent about 12 billion Egyptian pounds on the Takaful and Karama social program. This program provides financial aid to about 2.5 million families. In addition, there are monthly food subsidies for the poor families that cannot afford basic goods.
There is also a project to eradicate shanty towns around the country. Already tens of these places have been emptied out, and their inhabitants moved to new fully furnished housing complexes constructed by the government. To create sources of extra income for the poor, the president has allocated about $15 billion for small enterprises.
About 2,100,000 people have benefited from the government funding of small projects. Some of these small projects have grown to be a success, like Faori. About 40% of these projects are in the poor areas of Upper Egypt, and 60% of the small projects were established by women.
Poor villages are also being developed as part of a special program earmarked for the next 5 years. To ensure the continuation of efforts to fight poverty, the government has announced that it has increased funds for welfare projects by 20% in the next state budget. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, we're now joined by Dr. Hisham Ibrahim, a professor of economics at the Cairo University. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. With this widening gap between the poor and the rich in the continent, what are the contributing factors?
Good evening. Of course, we have some continent very rich, like Europe, and we have other continent very poor, like Africa. We have some countries very rich, like Germany, and we have poor country like Djibouti. We have some people very rich, more than $2,000 per day, and we have another less than $2 per day. Of course, we have many reasons for that. I think number one, the job, the employment. If we have unemployment rate high, so you have not income, so these people will be suffering. Some countries, the growth rate very low. These countries, of course, facing poverty. I think these factors need more support, more effort from the rich country. I think other factors affecting this poverty, the level of education and the level of health care. These factors, I think, affect the poverty all over the world.
Dr. Ibrahim, we know that this is an issue that has been discussed repeatedly with little or no significant impact in some African countries. What do you believe the steps should be taken to reduce the rich-poor gap?
I think we need more programs with cooperation with the United Nations, like the United Nations Developing Program, UNDP. We need to make the sustainability improvement. We need very high growth rate in these countries, in these poor countries. I think we need more effort on these countries. We need support from the rich countries like United States, like Germany, like Spain. We need some support from some countries like China, like Japanese. I think this powered economics you can make a lot of things for the poverty in the world.
Doctor, you've just mentioned it, and I would like for you to discuss that a little bit more. With China investing a lot in Africa, what are the effects that we are seeing from the Chinese investments on African economies?
Yes, of course, China will invest in Africa, I think, $60 billion. I think the more investments in the infrastructure project, the railways, the roads, the transportations, I think these investments can create more jobs for the African countries, can create more income for the African people.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Hisham Ibrahim, a professor of economics at the Cairo University. Well, as the world marks International Poverty Education Day in Kenya, one infrastructure project is contributing towards creating economic opportunities that could lift families out of poverty. The standard gauge railways, easing congestion, boosting trade, and creating trading hubs at its stations. CGTN's Wilkis Daunyawa reports.
The Kenya Standard Gauge Railway is the largest transport infrastructure project in the country since independence. The railway line is geared towards easing congestion while boosting regional trade and the local economy, and by creating economic opportunities, it has a role to play in lifting communities out of poverty. Phase 1 of the project, extending from Mombasa to Nairobi, was completed in May 2017 and is now fully operational with 14 freight and 4 passenger trains. The launch of Phase 2A of the project is expected to compound these gains. Official data shows that the SGR generated sales of around $55 million last year on the back of the cargo business, while the passenger train generated sales of nearly $15 million. Another major impact of the SGR on the Kenyan economy is the emergence of trading centers at its stations, as well as the reinvigoration of economic activities in already existent towns.
Na mimi nawahakikishia hata ile imebaki.
I promise you that we will complete the stretch that is left. And it's because we know that the railway brings development. And we also know that in this place where we stand right now, development will come because of the railway.
Given Kenya's market-based economy, the emergence of these centers is likely to boost growth in its key sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and financial services.
Na hii ni maendeleo ambayo tumehakikishia na tulieleza Wakenya ya kwamba tuatenda.
This is the development we promised Kenyans we would deliver, so that Kenyans would benefit and our economy would grow. Now we can get investors because we have strengthened the infrastructure of the country. Investors can set up factories here so that our youth can find employment.
All these factors contribute towards Kenya's objective to grow the country's GDP by 1.5%, a level of growth which, if realized, will have a major impact on lifting households across the country out of poverty. Wilkis Anyabo, CGTN.
Well, time now for us to take a short break and return. More news. Here's what you can expect. UK and EU leaders reach a deal on Brexit. And the US intensifies airstrikes targeting ISIL positions in Libya.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
For a look at some economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, to the latest on Brexit now. Leaders of 27 European Union member countries have endorsed the newest agreement. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has expressed confidence in the deal ahead of the October 31st deadline. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar has also weighed in, stating that the deal met all of Ireland's objectives.
For us in the UK, it means that we can deliver a real Brexit that achieves our objectives, and it means that the UK leaves whole and entire on October the 31st, and it means that Northern Ireland and every other part of the UK can take part.
We have a deal, and this deal means that there is no need for any kind of prolongation. And this is a fair, balanced agreement. It is testament to our commitment to finding solutions. It provides certainty where Brexit creates uncertainty. It protects the rights of our citizens, and it protects peace and stability on the island of Ireland.
Well, Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission, says the Brexit deal protects the rights of EU citizens in the UK and British expats living in Europe. The deal must pass the British Parliament, which will meet on Saturday. Opposition parties are already opposing the new deal. Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn calls it, quote, even worse than the deal proposed by former Prime Minister Theresa May, which was defeated 3 times in Parliament. Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party has also expressed opposition. Well, for more on this, we are now joined by our correspondent in London, Richard Bestick. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us more about the new deal. The UK's opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has criticised it, saying it's worse than that proposed by Theresa May. What are the major differences?
Well, the major difference is as far as the Labour Party, the opposition Labour Party here in Britain is concerned, rests largely with regulatory alliance. In other words, what's called an even playing field once Britain is finally out of the European Union. In other words, that Britain can diverge between trading standards with other countries away from the European Union. The Labour Party is very much concerned about that. As anticipated, however, they will be voting against this. Now, where it is controversially different from the old agreement, the old deal negotiated by the former Prime Minister Theresa May, rests with trading across the Irish border between north under British rule and south the independent republic there. And they've devised a mechanism by which there will be a dual status for Northern Ireland. It will be inside the European Union Customs Union, and it would also be inside the British Customs Union and benefit from any changes and new trade negotiations and deals that the British side may negotiate in the future. That is where the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has fallen foul of the Democratic Unionists. They are absolutely opposed to that and say that they don't want any situation which will take Northern Ireland out of the sphere of influence of London, because they believe that over the years, and there will be approval coming from the Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland every 4 years, they believe that if it goes on long enough, gradually the gravitational pull of Dublin will draw them into the Republic's sphere of influence, and the ties with London will be broken down. So that has lost Boris Johnson 10 votes, and that is an area which could cause him a good deal of problems when he makes his triumphant return from Brussels to this place, and a Saturday sitting, the first weekend sitting of the British Parliament in nearly 4 decades. Hannah.
Richard, well, let's assume the deal doesn't get support. The UK Parliament has a history of not pushing deals through. What happens next?
Yeah, this will be the fourth vote that has been put before Parliament. You'll remember Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, had 3 goes at trying to get her deal through Parliament, and every one was resoundingly defeated. Boris Johnson's coming back and saying, well, look, it really is this time, this deal or no deal. It's got to be said that the arithmetic is very tight indeed. Johnson has lost those 10 critical votes from the Democratic Unionists in Northern Ireland. He can't be certain of the number of votes he'll get from the 21 members of Parliament that he sacked from his own political party. And then, of course, there's that band of Brexit ultras who call themselves the Spartans. Nobody knows how many of them will vote against the deal in support of the Democratic Unionists. The rationale, however, goes something along the lines that it will be tight indeed. The reality is that Boris Johnson could once again be defeated. Where do we go from there? Well, then they've got to tie him down with this legislation that members of Parliament introduced, making sure that he extends the period, that the October 31st deadline is extended, and then try and either bring down the government, get a general election, or try and force the government into going for another referendum on this issue. Both difficult things to do, and the arithmetic in that place so complicated, nobody can be sure of which way it will ultimately go. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Richard. Richard Bestick speaking to us from London. Well, we move now to Guinea, where 9 people were killed during protests on Monday. The government had initially stated that 2 protesters had died, but revised the figures on Wednesday. Countrywide protests were sparked by President Alpha Conde asking for his government to look into drafting a new constitution. This followed the 81-year-old refusing to rule out seeking a third term, which is illegal under the current constitution. On Monday, police on the capital, Conakry, opened fire as demonstrators ransacked a military post. 15 members of the National Front for the Defense of the Constitution were arrested for inciting violence and threatening public order. During their court appearance on Wednesday, supporters chanted, "It will not pass," the opposition's slogan against Conde seeking a third term. Well, the United States Africa Command has carried out multiple airstrikes in the past weeks on ISIL targets. The first strikes reported were late in September and are believed to have stretched to October. A conflict over the control of Tripoli has left regions of the country exposed to terror groups. Adel El Marouchi has more on that story.
During the past 4 weeks, at least 4 U.S. airstrikes against ISIL in Libya have been reported. Around 40 militants are believed to have been killed.
The US lead airstrikes in coordination with Fayez al-Sarraj's government or with the LNA are necessary to halt ISIL's spread among Libyan cities. Without these airstrikes against ISIL, these cities will turn another stronghold to these groups where its violence will be non-stoppable.
These strikes will definitely curtail ISIL's power to spread in the divided North African nation. But analysts say a political solution between rival Libyan factions are crucial to put an end to the terrorist group.
Definitely an agreement among Libyan factions would defeat the terrorist groups. It's why world powers are trying to work on Libya's unity. Germany is hosting a conference. The Libyan parliament is calling for a unity government to prepare for holding national elections.
Since the fall of Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi, ISIL has fed on the political division. It has controlled several cities near the Mediterranean Sea. With ISIL's defeat in 2016 in Derna, Misrata and Benghazi, its remnants fled to the lawless south.
General Khalifa Haftar's military campaign against Tripoli has given ISIL the space it needed to grow in Libya's south. Close to the African Sahara, the group has been recruiting militants and spreading in countries like Chad and Niger. That makes ISIL once again a power that many countries want to see eliminated. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, the Ethiopian army's victory over that of Italy's aggression at Adwa about 124 years ago remains a point of pride. And to commemorate this historic event, Ethiopia has collaborated with China's Jiangsu International Construction Company to build the country's Adwa Museum. The center will have meeting halls, museums, art galleries, research centers, and more. It'll be the first of its kind in the country. CGTN's Giram Chala has more.
Fought about 124 years ago, the Battle of Adwa concluded with the defeat of the modern Italian army by Ethiopian patriots who carried primitive weapons, and the anti-colonial war, which lasted 6 hours only, is assumed to be the first major black victory against white aggression. And fast forward present day, Ethiopia has finished preparations to build a state-of-the-art Adwa Museum in the capital, Addis Ababa.
The planned Adwa Park, I would say, is yet another example of patriotism in this country. The victory at Adwa did not come easily. People came from across Ethiopia for one country and one flag. Perhaps half of those who marched had no similarity in language, but they were united under the agenda of saving their country from colonialism. We have to deliver for Ethiopia today as well.
This establishment, which is expected to be completed in less than 2 years' time, not only commemorates gallant patriots of the country, but also houses conference centers, art galleries, cinema halls, gymnasium, and 1,000 cars of parking space.
What Adwa teaches us is to choose unity over division, optimism over hopelessness, and victory through sacrifice over defeat. Our journey of building a better and greater city will continue. Taking the lesson of perseverance very well from our forefathers, us leaders of this city or the country will continue building this city to live up to its name and even serve the African purpose very well. I guarantee you this project will be one success soon.
The young Ethiopians who were part of this groundbreaking ceremony say the Adwa Museum is beyond putting bricks and cement together.
Adwa belongs to the whole wide world. We are working hard to promote this victory. This project is very remarkable.
What we need to learn from Adwa is to respect one another for the good of the country, to love one another and forgive at the same time for Ethiopia to move forward. We have to do exemplary work for Ethiopia to prosper.
We have undertaken what is known as the walk to Adwa. It took us 5 months to get there, but the Battle of Adwa took only 6 hours. I wish the project to be completed more like the battle itself. I want it to be completed shortly.
It is the China-based China Jiangsu International Construction Company which will build this magnificent establishment. It is said this is also yet another opportunity to strengthen the people-to-people ties between Ethiopia and China. Alongside the Adwa Museum, the government has intentions of building what is known as the 0 kilometers mark to be located inside the compound. The mark will serve as a point for any distance from the capital to begin from. Gumjana CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more news, but for now, let's hand over to Rama for the latest in business news.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business. Nigeria's central bank has refunded lenders the money to find them after they agreed to lend more to the private sector. And the deaf can now enjoy their music. We'll tell you how when we come back.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's start in East Africa, where Kenya's head of state has rejected a bill from legislators that sought to retain caps on interest rates. Instead, Uhuru Kenyatta now wants lawmakers to scrap limits on commercial lending rates, which critics say have led to a credit squeeze. Mr. Kenyatta is in agreement with the country's Treasury and the Central Bank of Kenya. Now, the argument is that the cap has in fact cut down private sector loan growth, arguing that banks have essentially avoided lending to consumers. Back in 2016, the Kenyan government limited the rates that banks can charge clients to no more than 4 percentage points above the central bank's policy rate, which is currently at 9%. However, if lawmakers do agree with the president, now that he's declined to assent to the finance bill, banks will have the ability to price credit depending on their assessment of a client's risk. Still on monetary policy issues, the Central Bank of Nigeria has refunded lenders part of the 500 billion naira, that's about $1.4 billion, that was essentially taken in as additional cash reserves. Late last month, the central bank imposed sanctions on at least 12 banks in the country. The move comes just over 3 months after the regulator gave lenders until the 30th of September to essentially hit a loan-to-deposit ratio of 60%. Since then, however, the target has been moved a little higher to 65%, and banks have until December to comply. The Central Bank of Nigeria says this directive will be reviewed every quarter. The measure is part of a raft of measures that are aimed at forcing banks to lend more, to extend more credit into the economy, ostensibly to help spur economic growth in Africa's largest oil producer. Speaking of oil, Nigeria's oil minister says that the country knows it can't recover all of the $62 billion it's claiming from oil majors. That's despite ongoing court cases against the companies for money that the government believes is due to it. Nigeria has been fighting for this cash under a 1990s law that states it can revisit production sharing contracts agreed to with oil majors if crude prices are above $20 a barrel. The oil minister urged the government to quickly pass amendments to the underlying law to ensure it did not miss out on additional revenue. Just last week, President Muhammadu Buhari said they could get an additional $500 million in 2020 and $1 billion the year after that just by revising the law. Talks in order to recoup some cash from oil majors like Shell, Chevron, Eni and ExxonMobil are ongoing. On to North Africa now. Tunisia's newly elected President Kais Saied has promised to fix the North African nation's ailing economy. Over the weekend, the former law professor secured 73% of votes cast in the country's runoff election. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi now exploring how ordinary citizens are hoping the new president can bring about some real change.
Kais Saied pledged to create a regional council in each governorate. The president-elect aims to reinforce administrative decentralization so as to initiate economic reforms, which will take into consideration the particularities and the needs of the regions.
This economic project by Mr. Saied was first announced in 2012 in the city of Sidi Bouzid. It moves from central to regional and then local governance, and it accepts the ideas of unemployed people and economic projects which emanate from inner cities instead of imposing economic solutions onto the regions.
The Tunisian constitution stipulates that the president is in charge of national security. Economists assert that guaranteeing food security and the production of phosphate and oil without interruption are among the top priorities of Kais Saied.
The president-elect shall guarantee the continuous flow of phosphate and oil, which can provide over $1.5 billion in revenue and reduce the energy deficit. He also talked about economic diplomacy, through which Tunisia can attract foreign investments, boost regional development and create jobs.
The new resident of Carthage Palace will practice his right of legislative initiatives, which is the constitutionally defined power to propose new economic bills.
The president-elect believes in participatory democracy. The Finance Commission at Parliament will discuss his legislative initiatives on economic reforms which emanate from the regions. The period of realization of projects will certainly be reduced.
Experts in constitutional matters assert that Tunisia's president-elect needs strong support from the majority at Parliament to adopt his economic bills and to defend his vision. However, as an independent candidate, Saied does not have a parliamentary group at the House of the People's Representatives. In 8 years, Tunisians have elected 2 presidents and 2 parliaments. But given that 9 successive governments have failed since 2011 to improve the social and economic situation, many citizens, especially unemployed people, are hoping Kais Saied will bring real change. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, electricity is considered a basic need, really, in today's world. Without it, economies really don't run properly. Basic social needs and services, from medical care to communication, education, they just don't work. For about 2/3 of the population in Madagascar, however, there is no viable choice other than to tap into alternative forms of energy. CGTN's Laura Olubengo has that story.
Claudine has been living in this makeshift temporary structure after her house was burnt down in Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo. 20 other families also lost their homes after the fire razed their house to the ground in August. The accident was caused by an electrical short circuit.
The short circuit started on that house over there. As the house is made of dry wood, when the pole caught fire, the electrical wire spread the fire to our house, which is also made of wood.
In Antananarivo, only 15% of the 26 million inhabitants have access to electricity. The rest rely solely on candles, oil and kerosene lamps. Candles cost 13 cents each compared to 50 cents per litre for kerosene. Two-thirds of the population is riddled by poverty, making the difference quite significant. Most of the villagers requested access to the power grid nearly 20 years ago.
People connect wherever they want without permission, and the transformers can't take the overload. An installation can only hold 3 amps, for example, and there are people doing welding, using hair appliances and other high-voltage devices. Cables from their homes can overheat and burn.
The energy situation in Madagascar is catastrophic. A state-owned power company, Jirama, has been indebted to the tune of $438 million and is operating at a loss of $82.8 million. This has forced many to opt for alternative solutions.
When I used to buy electricity from Jirama, whenever we watched TV shows, it would always cut out when it got interesting. Whereas since we've been using solar panels, we can use all our devices.
Jirama has little economic incentive to provide power to tiny villages. With the introduction of solar energy, it is an obvious alternative in a country that enjoys some 2,800 hours of sunlight annually. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
One last story for you in this segment. Fashion bloggers Himon and Heroda Berhane have been given the opportunity to enjoy music by feeling it, quite literally through their clothing. The twin sisters were born in Eritrea. They lost their hearing when they were children, but the sound shirt, as it's called, has been created by a London-based fashion company, Cute Circuit, and it's quite literally changing their nightlife. CGTN's Alexander Majala has that story.
Twin sisters Himon and Heroda Berhane love dancing, but both women can't hear the music because they are deaf. However, in London, the invention of a jacket with sensors has transformed their nights out in clubs.
So what you see here behind me is the sound shirt, and the sound shirt is a shirt that allows deaf people to feel music through touch sensations. So imagine you go to the symphony orchestra and you want to feel them. You wear this shirt and the orchestra starts playing, and you will feel different instruments in different parts of your shirt.
The sound shirt, created by London-based fashion company Cute Circuit, has 16 sensors embedded in its fabric. Wearers can feel violins on their arms, for example, while drums beat on their backs.
I feel as though the deaf community think, oh, what's the point in going to a nightclub if they can't hear the music? And for accessibility purposes, obviously it's not there at nightclubs at the moment, whether it's at festivals, nightclubs, events, anywhere with a dance floor, there's no accessibility for us. But with these sound shirts, here we are. It's almost like feeling the depth of the music. It just feels as though we can move along with it. So it's another sensation, it's really different.
It's like going all the way.
It took 3 years to perfect the shirt. Microphones are installed on stage in a venue for each instrument. Music is then sent in real time to a computer where software analyzes it and translates it into touch sensations. This is then sent wirelessly to the garment, all in real time. Cute Circuit made sure that the shirts were made to feel like normal clothes.
Inside the shirt, that by the way is completely textiles, there are no wires inside, so we're only using smart fabrics. We have a combination of microelectronics that is very thin and flexible, and conductive fabrics. All the little electronic motors are connected with these conductive fabrics so that the garment is soft and stretchable.
The company is no stranger to sensory technology. It originally designed the hug shirt, a piece of clothing created for people to send virtual hugs to friends over a distance. The sound shirt has received warm reviews from blind and autistic people, as well as those without any sensory issues, and the company hasn't stopped with sound. They have also come up with garments that communicate over distance, change color, and are controlled via an app. They are calling it the future of fashion. Sound shirts don't come cheap. They will be retailing at about $3,673. But Heroda believes it's a price worth paying for deaf people who enjoy music as much as she and her sister do. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
We'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though, in Global Business. We're looking at Nigeria's debt levels. Its debt service ratio is over 60%. What can be done to bring that down? We'll find out live from Lagos at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Rama. We are going to take a short break and return. More news, including... In Senegal, one returning migrant finds a ray of hope driving taxis in the capital, Dakar.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, let's turn to Senegal, where the country continues to face the issue of illegal migration to Europe. According to a 2018 European data report, Senegal was 10th among countries of origin for illegal sea crossings. We met up with a Senegalese who, over the past 13 years, has made several failed attempts at reaching Europe.
In 2006, Malik Kanjai left Senegal shores looking for a brighter future in Europe. He was arrested in the Mauritanian desert and spent 2 months in jail.
I chose the path of immigration because I want to help my family out of poverty. My family does not have the means to support even the most minimal needs. Life is difficult here, so I decided to immigrate illegally to Europe, hoping to find something to help my family financially. When I left Senegal, I stayed for more than 8 months without giving any news to my relatives. My family members thought I was dead.
Over the past 13 years, Malik continued to make failed attempts to reach Europe. For his wife and children, each trip exacted a heavy toll.
My situation is very hard when my husband is not at home. I manage on my own to support our 2 children. Whenever he's away, we are anxious and worried. If it was up to me, he would never have gone back. He has to stay in the country and try to invest here so he can get something and share it with the family.
At the behest of his wife, Malik started a taxi business.
Right now, I'm a taxi driver. This activity does not yield a lot of income. Sometimes I come home with $25, and when it's a good day, I earn $50. With the development of public transport, the taxi no longer provides a lot of profit. I have projects such as car rental or building a hen house and selling broilers. So I need to have money to carry out all these projects, which is not easy with the current situation of our country.
For now, Malik has put his dream of reaching Europe on the back burner, focusing on providing for his family at home. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, your sports news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Springboks ring crucial changes for their Rugby World Cup quarter-final match against Japan.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, to news just in. Turkey has agreed to suspend operations in northern Syria. That's according to U.S. Vice President Mike Pence.
Over the next 120 hours. And let me say that's literally already begun. And where they will be withdrawing from is the demarcation line roughly 20 miles south of the border. Turkey's willingness to pause and to embrace a ceasefire of military operations to enable us to see to that orderly withdrawal of YPG will, we believe, make it possible for that to occur. And I know it's already underway as we speak. Turkey's had a great concern about their border. And while the United States of America did not approve of their military crossing into Syria, we have always endorsed a safe zone. And it was a matter of discussion and negotiations. And we believe that the Kurdish population in Syria, with which we have a strong relationship, will continue to endure. The United States will always be grateful for our partnership with SDF in defeating ISIS, but we recognize the importance and the value of a safe zone to create a buffer between Syria proper and the Kurdish population and the Turkish border, and we're going to be working very closely. So
Well, that was U.S. Vice President Mike Pence speaking to us about that news just in about Turkey, which has agreed to suspend operations in northern Syria. Well, we're now going to take a look at what's happening in the world of sport. We start with South Africa, which has named their squad for their Rugby